Suzuka is a staple of the F1 calendar, one of the best tracks in the world to see an F1 car go round at speed, and is one that drivers all rate at the top of their list of circuits to visit. What's more is that it's in a car/racing passionate country, with enormous numbers of fans giving off a very unique Grand Prix atmosphere. Plus, with the track having hosted several dramatic moments in its history, including ones that would define a world championship, it is among F1 folklore. And quite honestly, it's impossible to envisage this track not being on an F1 calendar so long as F1 itself exists. However, it wasn't that long ago when another track in the country would hold the Japanese Grand Prix, that being Fuji Speedway. It's only held 4 Grand Prix, but it too has had its fair share of memorable moments, including the 1976 season finale and an enthralling race in 2007, albeit being rather soggy. So the country has had a number of iconic Grand Prix at 2 brilliant circuits over the years. But then, there is another track that is often forgotten by Formula 1 fans, yet that might be because it never actually hosted a Japanese Grand Prix. Plus, its tenure as an F1 event wasn't particularly long. So in that case, let me introduce you to the Okayama International Circuit, or as it was known back when F1 raced there, the Tanaka International Aida Circuit. Although to avoid confusion, I'll just call it Okayama in the rest of the video. Unfortunately, we have to head back to what was a fairly bleak year for Formula 1 in 1994. The circuit would host a race that was called the Pacific Grand Prix, the first time there had been a World Championship Pacific Grand Prix. There were non-championship versions of this event at Laguna Seca in the early 60s, but we don't count those in this video. The way this Grand Prix came about in the first place is rather interesting. The track was created in 1990 and was funded by a golf course developer called Hajime Tanaka. Now you know why the original name for the circuit had Tanaka in it. He was quite the car enthusiast and designed this circuit primarily as a country club style racetrack. The best way I can describe it to you is that it initially was like a Japanese version of the Thermal Club that'll be used by IndyCar next season in a non-championship event. If you were wealthy enough to pay the fee necessary to become a member of this club, then the Okayama circuit was your playground, and you could rent it out and drive your car as fast as you want. The fee, I hear some percentage of my audience ask? Well, it was £90,000. And in today's money, it would equate to around £220,000. What that is in other currencies? Sorry, you'll have to look that one up yourself. However, Tanaka apparently promised, as a way of selling more memberships, that this track would host a Formula 1 event. Which, as you can see here, it did. This track would host the second round of the 1994 F1 season, meaning that the late Ayrton Senna did participate in this race. In fact, he qualified on pole with Michael Schumacher alongside him. The 26-strong grid would be rounded off by the 2 Simtecs, David Brabham ahead of Roland Ratzenberger, who devastatingly would make his only Formula 1 start in this race. One level of ironicness though came in the form of the new team Pacific Racing, who at the Pacific Grand Prix wouldn't qualify for the race. At the start, Schumacher got a better launch than Senna, but Senna's race wouldn't last beyond turn 1 as Mika Häkkönen's McLaren nudged the Williams into a spin, with Nicola Larini's Ferrari slamming the side of the Williams, putting both cars out, along with the Tyrrell of Mark Blundell. The safety car though didn't come out, which in today's world would probably be declared a safety car within 10 seconds of the crash happening. A couple of laps later and Damon Hill had this off whilst trying to pass Häkkinen. He would tumble down the order and have a lot of places to try and make up. It's a good thing that the Williams were one of the faster cars in the field though, because it was able to do something that the other teams really struggled to do, and that was overtake. Okayama's track surface was apparently fairly low in grip, but that just meant that there was even more certainty of the teams running high downforce configurations of their cars, because this track was not very conducive to passing manoeuvres. Damon Hill's Williams was able to get by the cars he lost positions to gradually. However, like I said earlier, the Williams had a good-sized pace advantage over the field, bar Schumacher's Benetton, and the rest of the cars in this field didn't have such large gaps of performance between them that would potentially promote overtaking. The only place where passes were a vaguely common occurrence was the reasonably long straight down to the turn 5 hairpin, which was called hairpin. Damon Hill had climbed back up the order and was probably going to catch back up to Häkkinen, but Mika's McLaren was losing hydraulic pressure in the gearbox and retired on lap 19. Schumacher meanwhile was in complete control. Sure, his closest competition were having misfortune, but even so, Michael was lapping cars left, right and centre. In fact, at the halfway point, Schumacher had lapped every car up to 5th place. Also at the halfway mark on lap 42 was the start of Japanese driver disappointment. Okayama's Tyrrell had an engine issue, whilst a few laps later, Aguri Suzuki's Jordan had some form of steering issue. 5 laps later, the last true contender for Schumacher left in the race, Damon Hill, had a transmission problem, and also retired from the race. Jos Verstappen in the other Benetton went and had a fairly routine pit stop, only to then spin out almost immediately at the first corner, much to the not at all discreet delight of the Ferrari mechanics. Pierluigi Martini in his Minardi would also spin off on lap 63 at the Atwood curve. Then the other McLaren of Martin Brundle retired through overheating gremlins. The footwork of Gianni Morbidelli also seemed to be having some issues, but he at least was still carrying on. Hopefully he'll be able to get to the end of the race. Well, never mind. Also on lap 69 was a collision between Michele Alboretto's Minardi and Karl Wendlinger's Sauber, and it was quite some collision as well. 2 more cars out of the race, leaving just 11 still running. However, that's how many would be classified at race's end. Schumacher would win, but only just though. A gap of 75.3 seconds to the car in second, Gerhard Berger's Ferrari. He was the only car not to finish at least 1 lap down. Rubens Barrichello's Jordan was third, whilst the last classified finish of the race was Ratzenberger's Simtek in 11th, 5 laps off Schumacher. It was the first of a 5-year deal for this track to host the race, with the second race also meaning to be held in the early part of the 1995 season. However, it would be brought back to October due to the Great Hanshin earthquake. For this edition of the race, David Coulthard would be on pole in the Williams, ahead of his teammate Damon Hill and Michael Schumacher. Unlike the previous Pacific GP, the Pacific Racing Team would qualify for this race. They did round off the field, sure, but at least they took part. The start was much cleaner this time round, with Coulthard leading and Hill and Schumacher dropping a few positions. Our first retirement of the race? The Pacific of Bertrand Gachot. Jean-Christophe Bouillon would have a moment in his Sauber on lap 7. It would turn out to be his last race in Formula 1. Aguri Suzuki would also go off in this race. And then to complete the Pacific misery, Andrea Montemini would retire as well. Whilst all of this was going on though, Schumacher was evidently a fair bit faster than the cars ahead of him, but wasn't able to make much progress. Instead, his Benetton team had to use strategy with the overcut to get by the cars in 3rd and 2nd. Coulthard was having a pretty comfortable race up to this point, but with Schumacher free of traffic, the gap was closing every lap, until Schumacher got to the Williams' non-existent rear bumper, where he couldn't find a way past, so decided to pit instead. The cycling out of the pit stops would end up in Michael's favour, and he would inherit the lead of the race in the latter portions of said race. On lap 38 meanwhile, the footwork of Taki Inoue retired with electrical glitches. Once again, overtaking would hold back the excitement level for this event, but that didn't stop Schumacher taking victory and winning the championship with it. Coulthard was second, Hill was third. Everyone else was a lap down, the last of those being Pedro Diniz' 40 in 17th place, 6 laps down. On to the third race of the 5-year deal. Or not, as this was the last time the Pacific GP would be held. The main reason being that at this point, the circuit wasn't financially viable. But then, that begs the question, why was it not financially viable anymore? Well, when you look at certain factors, it's not too hard to see why. Firstly, the attendance was not great. For the 1995 race, the race day crowd was apparently around 15,000 people. Obviously, that doesn't lead to great money-making opportunities. But why? Even with the devastating loss of Senna and Honda at this point no longer involved in F1, this was still a country that loved motor racing. Well, you see, what I've so far not told you yet is the sheer remoteness from civilization that this circuit is. Now yes, the backdrops do look spectacular, however this mountainous area of Japan made this track a very isolated one. Its nearest major city, in Osaka, was a couple of hours drive away. And what's more, access to the track was impacted by having to get to the race via pre-organised buses. Around 1,500 of them, in fact. Then the track itself just wasn't all that captivating for F1 racing. Nowadays the track hosts exciting Super GT and Super Formula races. But as far as F1 is concerned, the tight and twisty layout meant that overtaking just wasn't easy. Hence why it may explain why this track's tenure in F1 has been rather forgotten. And also why I did this video in the first place, to be honest. Anyway, that is going to be it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed it, then I'd be incredibly appreciative if you did hit the like and subscribe buttons. However, until the next video, be kind to each other and enjoy the rest of your day.